All right, Parsha 101, Parshas Matos-Massei. It's a double Torah portion this week because we try to get through the entire Torah from one simple Torah to the next, basically. So depending on how holidays fall out, sometimes some Torah portions are doubled, if it's a leap year, etc. So first week's Torah portion, the first Torah portion of the week is Matos, which basically means the tribes. The name of it comes from the first verse of the Torah portion, V'daber Moshe el Roshei Matos B'nei Yisrael. Moshe spoke to the heads of the tribes of the Jewish people. These two Torah portions are going to end off the book of Bamidbar, the fourth book of the Torah. After that, it's only the last book of the Torah is left, the book of Devarim. And that book is mainly Moshe speaking to the Jewish people before he's going to pass away. Because here the Jewish people they're right now standing ready to enter the land. There's a few incidents that are happening. There's a few last minute things that have to be taken care of. But this is basically the end of the sojourn in the desert and time to go into the land of Israel and for the next stage and the next step to take place. So the first thing this week's Torah portion of Matos speaks about are the laws of vows. So the difference that they say is that if someone makes a vow, that's a declaration of intent on a specific object. Like this sheep is going to be a sacrifice or whatever it's going to be. An oath is a declaration of intent on oneself. As in, maybe someone realizes that they have certain challenges with certain things. No more chocolate chip cookies for me for a week or something, because that's the only way that I'll be able to curb that appetite. So things like that. And there's a lot of, if someone makes an oath, you can't just break it. So they might, maybe if they realize that it's something that's unrealistic or they can't achieve it anymore or whatever it's going to be, they have to go in front of the sage of the rabbis, and they have to, it's not that the vow is broken, it's that they get released from the vow. So they can't undo the vow. They could say, oh, you are no longer bound by this vow, is what occurs. And interesting is that it doesn't start from the age of bar mitzvah, but actually the year before that. So for a man, it's the age of 12. For girls, it's the age of 11. They can make these binding vows or oaths for themselves. And also, just the general idea is that kind of the strictness and the view of the oath is that God tells us that we should sanctify ourselves by that which is permitted to us. So an oath is taking what's permitted to us and creating like another boundary upon it. An extra rule for it. So that's good if that's needed, but we don't always have to be looking to, what else can I cut out? What else can I come out? There comes a certain point where it's like, this is allowed. How do I use it now for holiness? Now, the laws for a woman are a little bit different, especially a girl who's not yet married or she's not betrothed, especially in those days, that by the age of 11, after 12, she could have been betrothed at that point. So if the girl makes a vow and she's still living at home, she's not married yet, and the father hears it, if he doesn't say anything right away, then she is bound by that vow. But if he speaks up right away and is like, hey, hey, honey, I don't know that this is such a great idea. I know you should do this. Then he actually breaks the vow, and the girl's not bound by it anymore. And the same thing kind of happens like if she's engaged at that point. The fiance overhears it, right? So whether or not he's silent or not. Now, same thing also with the husband. Now, this is very specific because they can't just say, oh, I don't know about this oath or this vow that you're taking, but if it's something that's going to impact their relationship, then they can speak up and say, this vow is not good, and they could actually break the vow, as in that she will no longer be bound to it. And it all depends on whether or not they speak up right away or whether they remain silent. And there's different laws about, we don't take vows or oaths lightly, which is why a lot of people will be very careful not to use language of, and this is going an extra mile of not saying, oh, I promise, right? Or I promise this is the way it is. They won't use language like that because they're so strict and so careful with the language of vows and oaths. After that, in this week's Torah portion, it talks about Midian. Midian is the one that they try to get. First, they wanted Bilam to come and curse the Jewish people. Then Bilam's like, okay, get them to sin, be promiscuous, etc. So now God says, time to take vengeance on them. But we weren't going to bother them. You were going to go around them. But now what they've done to you, and many people died in the plague, and the whole thing happened with Cosby and Zimri and Pinchas, and he killed the people and whatever. So God's like, now it's time to exact vengeance. And he tells Moshe specifically, you gotta take vengeance. This is basically the last act that you're gonna do for the people, and after that you're gonna be gathered to your people and you're gonna pass away. And even though Moshe knew that this was like his last stand, kind of, he did not delay, and he went right away to the people and said, arm yourselves. We got something to take care of. And it's just interesting, the language of God says, take my vengeance. You got to exact vengeance, and Moshe says we're going to enact vengeance, whatever. The way that it's God's vengeance versus your vengeance, and it's just God's like, when you mess with my people, this is my vengeance too. So he said, okay, we need 1,000 people from every tribe. Even the tribe of Levi had to send people for this because of what was done. And it's actually Pinchas kind of led the charge on this. even though Moshe went and gathered other people, etc. Just an interesting Chassidic insight on this. It's a whole discourse from the fifth Rebbe that speaks about this, but very quickly it speaks about how the word for Midian comes from the word of strife and argument. So it's something that represents division, right? And what is division? How can division occur? Division occurs in a place of ego, in a place where it's like, my way has to be it. So now we can't get along because each one of us has to have our way. The more self we are, the more divided we become. Moshe represented humility, right? And humility is a place without ego and that could go beyond the ego of, it doesn't only have to be my way. Maybe there's something else that we could do here. Not only that, Moshe is the one who gave us the Torah. And the Torah represents that which is above everything. That which is above all divisiveness and individuality in the sense that it divides us. And Torah is the ultimate unifier because Torah is from God and God is above all. So this is kind of a deeper insight of why Moshe had to be the one to go take care of Midian. So they killed all the men of Midian. They killed all there were 5 Midianite kings that they killed. They killed Bilam was there at the time. So they killed him too, and they plundered everything. They plundered the villages. They took everything, and they burned down castles and just destruction. And they actually, all the spoils and things like that, they brought it before Moshe and Elazar. Elazar is the new Kohen Gadol, the high priest, now that Aaron passed away. So Elazar is his son who took over now. And they say, okay, here's all the stuff. And Moshe actually says, what went on here? You let all the women live? Because specifically, the women were the one who caused the sin. They went out to basically prostitute themselves because that's what their hatred for the Jewish people was. So Moshe said, you can't just let the woman live. And not just the woman who sinned, who caused sin, but also any of the women who were old enough, like kind of had already reached puberty, because they were going to be brought into this culture of sin. This, which just goes to show what the Torah views of this kind of promiscuity, how harshly the Torah deals with this. And it says this cannot be among the people. This is something that destroys a people, this kind of promiscuity. And so Moshe says you got to get rid of all of them. And they had to kill the women also. And the young children, young girls were allowed to live. But the young boys, everything, it was a total, when we talk exacting vengeance, there was vengeance that was exacted. Because it was basically a purging that kind of occurred, which wouldn't have occurred if they hadn't messed with them to begin with. But this is the retribution. Then it says, okay, anybody who touched a corpse, anybody who killed someone, you have to purify yourself, and the whole thing with the ashes, things that have been spoken about before. Then they said, okay, all garments, anything that's made out of leather or like a goat kind of product, and it's made from that, wooden articles, whatever, there has to be a purification for it. Elazar instructed that any gold, silver, copper, iron, tin, lead, basically any sort of metal material, eating food instrument or anything like that had to be, you had to fire with fire. Like if it's passed through fire, as in like if it's been used for food, you got to burn it up with fire so that it will be purified. You have pots of boiling water, kind of like the way that we kosher things today with the boiling water and the fire and things like that. That's what they had to do if they wanted to use anything that was used. And there had to be a purification process that occurred. And more things about that. So then Hashem said, okay, take all the booty, take all the stuff that's been accumulated, and it's going to be evenly divided between everybody. 50, the warriors, anybody who went out to fight gets 50%, and the rest of it is going to be divided among the people. And each one has to give, for all the soldiers, all the warriors, 1 in 500 of each thing is going to be a tax. That's going to be given to Elazar, the high priest, and he's going to have that. And 1 in 50 from everybody else is going to go to the tribe of Levi. It's going to be split up among them because these are the caretakers, etc. So it came out to there were 675,000 sheep, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 3,200 young girls. You could, become maid servants or whatever. So the division is that you have 337,500 sheep, and 675 of those were the tax of the 1 in 500. Then there's 36,000 cattle that's given to all the warriors, and 72 cattle that went for the tax. Then 30,500 of the donkeys, 61 of those went for the tax, and 16,000 of the young girls, and 32 of them were going to be servants, kind of. And then what happened is that all the army commanders, they come up to Moshe, and they said, we counted, and all of our men are still here. We lost no one. And in thanks for that, we're taking all the gold, the anklets, the bracelets, the rings, basically all these things that the woman used, the woman who had caused this sin to begin with, and we want to give it now as atonement and in gratitude, etc. And that came out to 16,750 shekel of gold, whatever, that's the weight of what was given. So that's the next thing that occurred in the Parsha. Next, we have this Torah portion ends off with, there was all this land that had now been conquered on the other side of the Jordan River. They hadn't yet entered the land of Israel, and yet because they fought all these wars, there was all this land that was conquered. And some of it was supposed to have been conquered at the time, but some of it just because people were messing with them, they got to conquer a lot more land. So you had Reuven, the tribes of Reuven, the tribe of Gad, went to Moshe, and they said, we got a lot of livestock, and this is great land for pasture. We want to stay here on this side, and we want to have the inheritance of the land of Israel. Let this be our inheritance. And Moshe, they said livestock, and then we'll build cities for our wives and children. And Moshe specifically said, no, you'll build cities for your wives and children, and then you'll take care of your livestock. Like, get your priorities straight, kind of. But he also said, you're going to stay here while you're going to send your brothers off to war. They're going to go conquer the land of Israel. You can't just stick around here. So they agreed. They said, okay, let us build the cities for our wives and children. We'll keep them in a safe place. And then we'll arm ourselves and we'll lead the charge to go conquer the rest of the land of Canaan. Like, we're going to go conquer the rest of the land. And once all of our, the brothers, the rest of the tribes are all settled, then we'll come back to our land here. And it actually was going to be a process of 14 years. It took 7 years to kind of conquer everything, another 7 years to kind of settle it. So 14 years, all these warriors from these two tribes did not go home for that time. But once they said that, Moshe agreed. And he said, you better stick with this. If you're going to stick with this, all's going to be good for you. And if not, there's going to be punishment if you don't follow through on your word right now. And then additionally, what Moshe did, first of all, he told Joshua is the next leader, and he told Elazar, the high priest, hold them to account. And also the tribe of Manasseh, one of Joseph's sons, tribe of Manasseh, who from that same tribe is where we had the 5 daughters last time. He said, we want an inheritance. Their love of the land was so strong, he split the tribe. He said half is going to be on this side of the river, half is going to be on that side of the river. Different reason to give for that, but that's what he did. So it's kind of, let's say the tribe of Manasseh had about 8 clans within it. So 2 of the clans were on the one side of the river, and the rest were going to have their portion in the land of Israel. That ends the Torah portion of Matos. Now we go into Massei. Massei are the journeys. Ela Massei b'nei Yisrael asher yetzu Mitzrayim. These are the journeys, the travels of the Jewish people when they left the land of Egypt. The Torah portion begins with listing the 42 journeys that the Jewish people took. There's different explanations for this, and one of the things that we have especially from Chassidus is that these 42 journeys are not just the physical journeys that they took, they traveled here, until they finally got to the land of Israel. These are spiritual journeys that occurred. And even there's sometimes some of these journeys are described just as a location. Some kind of have a little recap. Remember this happened here? And it's because even in the spiritual journey, there are times that it seems like we might be going backwards. But when we learn from the times that go backwards, what seems to be backwards, when we learn from that and we gain from that, that's actually now becomes a step forward. So all of these journeys are summarized and they're listed. Then Moshe tells the Jewish people, when you're going to enter the land of Canaan, you're going to drive out all the nations. You got to drive them all out, and you have to get rid of all idolatry that is there. You will burn it, melt it, destroy it. The temples and the images and the little statues, all of it. You must purge the land of all idolatry. And this, you got to make sure that you do this, and this is going to bring peace, etc. If not, these people are going to be a thorn in your side, and you're going to have no peace from them. And then after that, he says, okay, the land's going to be divided by lot. Now there's going to be 9.5 tribes that are now going to get the portion of the land. Larger tribes will get larger sizes, etc. Then it goes into how the tribe of Levi, they didn't have a specific portion of the land. Instead, each tribe, according to their size, had to give a certain amount of cities to the tribe of Levi. And they would have the city, and then you would count 1,000 cubits out of it would be kind of uncultivated land that's for for livestock and things like that. And it'd be another 1,000 cubits outside of the city, so 2,000 cubits on all sides, and that could be for agriculture and things like that. This is what the tribe of Levi, this was kind of their inheritance in the land, because they didn't get a specific inheritance. And so altogether, they were given 48 cities, and 6 of those cities became what's known as an Ari Mikla, which is a city of refuge. The city of refuge, there's very clear instructions about how there have to be clear signposts for it. The roads toward it have to be maintained. You can't just lose the city somewhere in the tumbleweeds or whatever it is. And if the city of refuge, which we'll get into a little bit more in just a second, but there's a lesson for us to be living signposts also, that people who direct and guide and usher people toward the proper way of living. So what is the Ari Mikla? The Ari Mikla, the city of refuge, was for a person if someone, God forbid, they unintentionally kill someone else. So someone who's an intentional murderer, that person has to be tried, convicted, and put to death. And it lists different things, like if someone strikes someone out of malice, right? If they strike someone with an iron weapon or something, if they throw a rock, like a large rock at them, that is harmful, that is with intent, that is malice involved, that person is considered a murderer. But then there are some people who, they might have knocked against someone, they might have shoved someone or something like that, and it was sort of accidental, it wasn't necessarily intentional, and the person might have died from what occurred. So now what happens? Especially in those days, it was what's called a Goel Adam, the redeemer of the blood, and a close relative can actually go after that person who unintentionally killed their family member. So this person, what's he supposed to do? He runs to an Ar Miklad, to a city of refuge. And while he is in that city, he is safe. And you can't extract him, you can't pay any bribes or anything like that to try to get him out. Once he's there, he's in the safe zone. Right? He touched home base. He's there. And he's going to be there, first of all, till a trial is going to occur. And he has to be protected on the way to and from trial. We can't be negligent about these things. And they're going to decide, was this murder really unintentional or not? If they determine that the murder is intentional, right, and there's witnesses, there have to be two witnesses to say this was an intentional murder. Even for the Redeemer of blood, he has to know from two witnesses this was intentional. So if it was intentional, then there's consequences for that. There's punishment for that. But if it was unintentional, so now is he exonerated or not? So of course if he gets acquitted, then he goes back to living. But if he's not necessarily, he might end up stuck in one of these cities of refuge, and he will have to be there until the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, dies. Different reasons for that, but part of it is the Kohen Gadol, when he goes Yom Kippur, he goes into the Holy of Holies, he's supposed to be praying for the welfare of the Jewish people, for good life, for long life. The people should be on the proper path and things like that. And this basically occurred under his watch. So it's kind of either he prays he's the spiritual leader of the Jewish people, but he still is praying for their physical welfare and things like that. This kind of occurred under his watch. So it's not that he has accountability for it, but it's like, are you sure that your prayers were all as they should be? Because if this could occur, that's why he's going to be there until that time. And there were 3 cities that were set up in the land of Israel proper, and 3 cities were set up on the other side of the Jordan River. That's what's called the Ar Miklad. Now, the last thing this Torah portion ends off with is you have from the tribe of Manasseh, who, again, the daughters of Tzlafcha, there were 5 daughters, there were no sons. They came to Moshe and they said, our father died, he's got no sons, we want an inheritance. And in fact, they did get an inheritance of the land. It just shows the love that they had for the land of Israel, they actually got it. But now you have some of the leaders of the tribe Manasseh said, when the daughters of Tzlafcha, when they will marry, that land is going to transfer to another tribe. Because the assets are going to move. So it's basically going to whittle down our inheritance, our land. And it's not just that. They're saying any time that a daughter inherits from the father, because it could happen if there's no sons, there's no man, the daughter inherits. But then what happens when the daughter marries, or she passes it on to her daughter, whatever, whoever gets it next, and they might marry out of the tribe. So what's going to happen? You're going to have all these spots within all these tribe things. It's going to break up the tribal inheritance. So Moshe said, the daughters of Tzlafcha, let them find someone to marry within the tribe. And this is what the law is, that when a woman inherits, she should marry within the tribe, so that way the land stays within the tribe. And that is the end of Parshas Massei.